Welcome to our next session where we're talking about how you measure and analyze the results, right? Like if all this stuff happened, but you can't tell what actually happened. Did it ever happen? Well, of course, but we're going to dig deep into this right now. So what we do want to first mention is a couple logistical items. We're going to be recording this. We'll be sharing it out afterwards, as we always do. And more exciting is we want you to submit your craziest, your worst trade-in story, right? So we are giving out, oh my God, it's so heavy. This big cooler for whoever has the wildest trade-in story. You can submit it to marketing@tradepending.com, or there is a survey after this or throughout the session you can take and put in your information there to give us your wildest, craziest, worst trade-in story. And we're picking winners today at 4:30 Eastern. Welcome, panelists. Thank you for being here. So this is me, Matthew Davis, Chief Marketing Officer at Trade Pending. We're going to go around the horn here, around the room. We'll have George, Michael, and Catherine introduce yourselves in that order. Take it away, George.
Thank you. My name is George Nenni. I started in the car business 30 years ago in '93. Two of my older brothers had started a family business, Dealer Specialties, which I think most people are familiar with. We grew that business across the country in the '90s and then sold it in January of 2000 to Trader Publishing, who over time became Dominion. Did a lot of acquisitions. I ran a number of businesses for them until late 2017 when I left to start Generations Digital. Our goal is to make dealers smarter and better consumers of digital marketing.
Wonderful. Over to you, Michael.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm Michael Sundquist, Chief Marketing Officer for Strong Automotive Merchandising. I am 20 years in now. Spent the first 18 years at the dealer level, and about 2 years ago, partnered up with Strong to really try to bring the agency to another level and hopefully provide some education opportunities to people that were at the tier 3 level.
Wonderful. So you made the jump to the dark side over the last couple of years. How's it been?
I like it a lot. I rather enjoy helping dealers kind of solve problems that I dealt with forever, and hopefully solve them in a smoother fashion than the headbanging that I went through.
Awesome. Catherine, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Bandstra, and I started my automotive career much later than these two wonderful gentlemen in 2020. And I started in sales at Schomp Honda here in Colorado. And then I made the jump over to marketing pretty quickly after that, after a year. And what I do is I'm a marketing account manager. So I serve our stores. I handle everything from their CRMs to whatever OEM promotions might be happening. But really what our passion is here is data analytics. And I am now the data performance analyst, and I take measurements every single month, let our dealers know how they're doing, how they can improve, and where there might be erosion in processes.
Thank you, Catherine. So all three of you are repeat offenders on some kind of trade pending content. Thank you for coming back. I think we're going to have a lovely and lively discussion here. What's still very much top of mind right now is that the switch to Google Analytics 4, GA4, and George, we're going to kick this off with you. So talk us through the common challenges that you are now seeing with GA4.
Some of the biggest challenges I think are just around setups and around conversion setup. And so at its most basic level, one of the challenges with GA4 is there's no views. And so everyone is working in the same view. And so in the past, Google Analytics offered these views. And so if a vendor popped up and said we wanted to have our own view and create our own unique goals, wouldn't matter to the dealership, doesn't affect their reporting at all. Today in GA4, we all work in the same view. And so if a vendor who didn't really know what they were doing got in and got edit access, they could wreck the reporting for a month before someone caught some of the damage, and the damage would be around conversion. So around which conversions or which events rather should be marked as conversions. And with the ASC standards, it's a very robust kind of platform for being able to mark events as standards, but it is also tricky. So along with that power and capability comes complexity, and so I think a lot of dealers are struggling with how to specifically set up events that may reference any underlying parameters. So those are probably the biggest challenges.
Yeah, do we think that Google is at any point, have you heard any rumors or inklings that they are going to reinstitute or reinstate views?
I would suspect more than a 50% chance that happens. Who knows when?
Got it. Now, Michael, you're deep into this as well. I know you guys have seen some specific challenges also around thresholding. Like, tell us what the heck is going on with that. How do people think about it? George, feel free to chime in. Catherine as well.
Yeah, I think the two biggest things from our side as we're analyzing is thresholding, but with that comes some of this unassigned traffic. The new unassigned traffic channel that's Google's new kind of trash bin of I don't know where it goes, so here you go. And part of it is, hey, we as marketers got a little sloppy and we're not properly doing tagging and to write syntax and that kind of sort of thing. But then also, from the vendor community side, they're still working out kinks. If you're using a vendor that's using the measurement protocol, a lot of those are coming into unassigned traffic just because of the way that needs to be sent, and it's not being sent quite correctly just yet. So huge struggle there, particularly if your dealer is using those events coming in as conversion events to be attributed to other paid for marketing aspects.
One of the other challenges that you've seen and mentioned is this idea of user versus session source. Talk us through what is going on there. And I know we've got some resources we can share out afterwards too.
Sure. It's a good question. The canned reporting in Google Analytics 4 is much different than Universal. In the old GA3 or Google Analytics Universal, users and sessions were sort of dealt with and individualized. But with GA4, they really delineate the reporting from users versus traffic or versus sessions. And so essentially, if you look at user reporting, it will always be first click. And so the attribution will never change once a visitor comes into the site. And so we're advising dealers for the most part to avoid all user reports and just stick with session reports if you want apples to apples with GA3. Now, there are times when you want to know, what traffic tends to send me visitors for the first time that may or may not convert, but eventually do convert. And that would be the user reports. And you'll see companies like, third-party classifieds, Auto Trader, Cars, Car Gurus. And you'll also see OEM traffic. So ramtrucks.com, jeeps.com tend to send traffic that introduces a visitor to the site for the first time, and they may or may not convert on that visit.
Got it. And Catherine, I do have a question for you, but before I get to it there, is there anything that you want to throw in from your perspective that you've seen from the GA4?
Well, I think George kind of hit it right on the head. Is you need to be able to compare apples to apples, and you can't do that when you have, if you have an enterprise that represents multiple OEMs and people are on different third-party vendors, you have to be able to tag appropriately, get those measurements solid. So as you're comparing your rooftops across, whatever space and time it is, you're looking at data that's relevant in parallel. If something's happening in one store that's not in the other, you're going to be lost on what is actually progressing and moving in the right way versus what's not. That's
a great kind of way for us to switch that conversation. So you've mentioned before to us, when we talk about GA4, you're like, yeah, I'm fine to talk about this, but I need for yourself to be thinking about what is the big picture, what's the true north. Catherine, what do you mean by that?
So when we had talked, Matthew, about what true north is, it's about using all of your data, not just GA4 and relying on one single source. And what we have a passion for is digging into our CRMs, extracting that data, making sure that everything is tagged appropriately from the source of these leads, whether it's phone, showroom, calling in. It really doesn't matter if it's a website lead. What we're doing is we are tracking that and making sure that those tags come in and consolidating and cleaning the data. Because when something comes in for trade pending, for say, it can come in as trade pending from dealer website, trade pending from outside source, and we consolidate all that data. Your true north is really only as good as your processes and as good as the systems that you set up. And this is very parallel to GA4. It's only as good as your setup in the initial and how you take care of it. And the analogy that I used with you, Matthew, was it's your compass. If your compass is a good military grade compass, you're on the right track. But if it's one of those $1 kid party compasses because your process is eroding and not all of your stores are set up or your GA4 isn't set up the right way and systematically for success from the get-go, you're going to be fumbling and in this mess of what am I looking at continually. It's a very ugly habitual loop to get yourself into, for sure.
And what you're getting at here is really the importance of standardization in process.
Absolutely.
How do you approach that from yourself, from the data that you look at, and then to the degree you can speak about it at the dealership? Give us some insight.
Absolutely.
Are you doing this manually, like bit by bit? Do you?
A little
Like,
bit.
Yeah, you have to, right? Talk to us.
Absolutely. Our group is in the middle of expansion, which is always a great thing. But as we're adding more stores, we kind of have this checklist, if you will. And it all starts with the CRM and how we're going to merchandise our sites. Everything from template overlays on our vehicles to saying this vehicle is available, this vehicle is incoming, simple things like that. But when it comes to the CRM, we're making sure that they have the CAs, the managers, whoever they are, have the appropriate way to mark their leads. So we know where they're coming from. And we have this very meticulous process of setting up follow-ups and triggers and tags, no matter what we're doing. This applies to GA4 too. And most importantly, as we make this conversion, getting all of our vendors to kind of communicate with us and knowing what our vendors' processes are and making sure that they're cohesive for what we're trying to achieve too.
Thank you. So we've hit upon some challenges of the new approach with GA4, but Michael, you had mentioned some wins. What wins are we seeing? Michael, to you first and then to George.
Yeah, great question. So I think honestly the biggest win, and I'm going to talk about how rich the data is actually that barrier to entry, right? So you go back 2015, 2016, and you called the vendor and said, hey, I need you to start sending events to my GA3. And they kind of looked at you sideways and like, what are you talking about? And for a lot of us, we then went and learned how to use Tag Manager and write our own tags. And now with ASC, you call your vendor and they're happy to do it. They're ecstatic to do it, and you can get standardized sets of events with all the same naming conventions. And so that barrier to entry to start working on and looking at data in a true way is much, much easier now. Beyond that, the scope of the data, right? So, whether it's looking at, form submissions and knowing exactly what kind of car and sourcing, back to George's comment on the two scopes, the user and event scope, right? And understanding what's brought the user in originally versus what actually brought them in when they converted, to understanding, VDP level stuff where, hey, here's your data dealer that shows me that your inexpensive advertising is going to the top 10% of your inventory, and the 90% of your inventory is getting nothing. And that's a really easy thing to pull out now. So the richness of the data and the ease of getting it is just a huge win over what we had with GA3. Even at the end, it wasn't as easy as it is now.
Yeah, George, what are you seeing as some wins?
GA4 offers new channels. So the new channel grouping, so having cross network, having paid social versus organic social, video broken out into a couple different channels, gives the user a better ability to be able to parse out, what's my VLA or my performance max, conversion rate compared to my normal paid search, just with some pretty easy reporting. So we like that. For me, that the ASC events make our life tremendously easier, especially when a dealership switches from one chat provider to another. The switches involved in GA4. If you're using ASC events, there's really no work involved. It's an automatic thing. But even more importantly, being able to pass intelligence through the events, through the parameters. So there's if you read that ASC standard, there's fields for first date I've seen that vehicle. Is it CPO or new or used? And so being able to run a report and say, last month, instead of here's my overall trade pending leads from submits or tool interactions, here's CPO versus new versus used. Here's how I'm doing on my aged units versus my fresh units in terms of trade activity, whatever it is. And so I think we'll see some really, really unique reporting.
Yeah, something you guys have mentioned previously was, VDP analysis is much better. Conversion visualization is much better. George or Michael, give us a little bit of extra context there on what we mean by that.
Yeah, I think it's just the mention before, just being able to get more granular in terms of measuring conversions, and really anything on the page could be passed, right? So anything from the VDP, or even things on the inbound traffic. So if you're using a call tracking system, before that call tracking system writes an event for that phone lead, or that, saying that there was a phone call, they could do an automatic listener and then write out the parameter saying, was it sales, service, body shop, and pass that through. And so, often attributing campaigns around phone calls, or especially around fixed ops, is difficult. And so I think that really unlocks that.
No, I mean that's kind of right on the button there, right? So, instead of fighting to grab information and scrape it off of a page, it's now just there, right? And you're not digging through labels inside of GA3. It's there. It's easy to use. Again, kind of going back to that barrier to entry, it doesn't take a ton of the curve is big, but it's a fast curve, right? You can really get into doing GA4 reports quickly and understand what you're seeing, and without a ton of just absolutely digging through documentation online of what does this mean and what does that mean.
The switch to GA4 has been really tough, right? Because I have to learn something new. I wasn't ready to learn something new. Catherine, are you seeing wins, or have you had the same mental struggle that I have? Not that anybody cares what my mental struggle has been, but how have you been thinking about that switch from GA3 to 4?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, unfortunately, in automotive, we kind of go a little bit away from progressiveness sometimes, and we cling to our old ways. And it's kind of about ushering in that new era and kind of looking for those wins, as both Michael and George annotated, and saying, okay, this is where it can be very helpful for us. But yeah, it's been a struggle. But thankfully, a lot of our vendors are very much on top of it. So that's kind of nice when you can come together to the table for the same goal. But I'm with you guys. Just a radical shift.
And tying it back to one of your earlier comments about importance of standardization, you'd mentioned we've got to be able to elegantly blend data sources together. Where does the consumer data platform, or the unified data platform, or whatever freaking acronym we want to throw out, where are you thinking about that right now? How are you thinking about that right now, Catherine?
We think about it kind of like in a multi-dimensional chess playing. If you guys have ever heard of 3D chess, it's kind of this layered perspective. The first
I'm
thing
already scared.
I know it's a lot, but really what it is you need to establish your baseline first and foremost. And the only way we can do that is pulling what we know from GA3 and going, okay, this is where we started. What were we seeing that was good? What were we missing? What can we better standardize? And cleaning that up to prepare ourselves for this shift and making it happen. And the other thing that we're always looking in our baseline is that you need to have a time continuum. We're personally fans of measuring every 90 days rather than your typical 30-day, sales cycle, which is a little bit radical for some people. But if you don't know what's happening in the past 90 days, particularly as marketers, how can you see when your trends are moving up and down without that time continuum? The other thing when it comes to blending data is making sure that you're using measurements that matter to those that you're presenting them to. People care about their engagement rate. People care about their close rate. People care about what marketing funnels are we pumping money into that we're getting a strong ROI from. So it's about looking at all of those things. And I know that we had talked about different data sets for different people, but it's making that very seamless. It makes it easy to digest. And it's taking all, as Michael said, you're taking all this data that's kind of messy sometimes, and then it is becoming very apparent how you can make it usable. It's like taking a whole mess of Legos on the floor, sorting it into color, and then actually building the set that you're supposed to when you visualize it and you pull these reports. And that's what our goal is.
Yeah, I want to come back to the different data for different people in just a second. Michael, from your side, how are you guys thinking about this whole concept of multiple different data sources into one spot, whether it's a CDP, UDP, CD, UXP, whatever? How are you thinking?
Yeah, so obviously the integrations with the rest of the Google network on GA4 are significantly better. Probably my favorite feature is the automatic and free integration with BigQuery, which now allows you to just have that daily, or if your client wants to spend and it's low cost you can spend for, kind of real-time data transfer to BigQuery. If you're a group of any size, right, whether it's 3 stores or 50 stores, being able to send that out into databases and then easily manipulate them, whether you're going to use Python or SQL or whatever, to have a overall group roll up and group data where you can start to segment your users that you're already paying for, and know where they're coming from, know their locations, and easily do this and then send that data to whatever other marketing channels you want is incredible. It also gives that opportunity, back to Catherine, is start to bring in that CRM data to match up with what you're seeing coming out of GA4. So you kind of get that bigger global picture, more efficiency come out of it, because you're not restarting everything for every store that you have. You're starting from a base level of information and what can or cannot work, and then going from there.
Got it. George, what are your clients? Are they having any rumblings about consumer data platforms, CDPs, right now?
Yeah, I think to some degree, I think an increased awareness or just paying more attention, and before that, before the acronyms and the focus on it. I mean, from our perspective, we are, fairly obsessed with first party data, whether it be, their own retargeting pixels and following shoppers around, or just making sure that they obsess on email collection, do regular hygiene on their database, and really from an email perspective, that they're taking advantage of that. We take all of our data, all of our GA4 data, and bring it into Looker, along with, we have an API with Google Business Profile and also with Google Ads, and we have integrations into third-party classified. So ultimately, Looker is where we want to bring all that data in for visualization. And when we bring on a new customer, it's always the same thing, like overspending in paid search, either misspending or underspending in paid social, and then spending almost zero in email. And when you bring up email marketing, but it's so effective, and I would argue it's the most trackable digital marketing you can do is email campaigns, because you can really track every click along the way. And for fixed operations, I mean, there's really nothing better, because you can attribute the closed ROs to the list you emailed out. And so for us, I mean, I think the email vendor is going to end up being the most logical place for that CDP, because they were probably the ones paying the most attention to having good quality data and managing that. But yeah, there's a lot of data missing, from that model. So
excellent. Catherine, you had talked about different data for different people or different shareholders, constituents. Talk us through, what are the types of shareholders you're preparing data for? Like, who are the actual titles? And then what are those differences, those nuances between the types of data that you're sharing with them?
Absolutely. So we break our data down a little bit different, and instead of pulling our data into Looker to visualize, we use Tableau. And when we're using Tableau, we're building 3 core visualizations. The first one is called Trends. And what Trends is doing is giving you very graphic depictions of, if you're moving up or down. We can pull new, used, even vehicle type in there, where the lead is coming from. We always include campaign, phone, email, showroom, things like that. And then, of course, online leads. And what this visualization is doing is, it's for the marketer. It's for your finance people that are trying to make decisions on, are we making good reconciliations for what we're spending, or do we need to look at this? Why are new car leads down? Do we need to better merchandise our sites? Things like that. Our second visualization is called Analytics. It's my personal favorite, because I'm just a data nerd at heart. And really what that is it's for your top level operators. And it's also for the low level operators, your in-store managers, your internet sales managers, your GSMs. And it picks apart every single person in your enterprise. You can select a store, go into your individual client advisors or salespeople, and go, this person is closing at 8% with average lead counts, while this person who has all the leads, double the leads of everyone else, is only closing at 4%. And then we can see, hey, this person's better at trade pending. This person's better with new card leads. And we divvy them out on the ground. This is a tool that they can use instantaneously. We update it continually to make sure it has the most accurate data. One thing we have to remember, though, with that is, it's always going to be trailing data. It's not live. It's not happening. So we have to be a little bit gracious with things like that, because we know one of 2 things happens with a car deal. It either sells or the lead is dead. So after time, we know that dead percentage is going to go up. But we need to see how our client advisors are marking those leads, and if our sales managers are taking appropriate follow-up steps to make sure that it was in fact a good lead to close, or whether more could have been done and they need to be re-engaged. often through email campaigns, to retarget them and say, we saw you were looking at this vehicle. We have all these new ones coming in, something like that. And then finally, we have what's called Moneyball. This is another great one for your GMs and your higher level people, and particularly on our executive board, where we can compare apples to apples. We take all of our stores with all the same measurements, and we can look at individual source, where they're coming from. And we put them on a quadrant, and anyone who's in your top right square is your overperformers, which we love to see. People that have above average lead count with above average closing. And we can see just in that visualization who's falling behind and why. Is it just a matter of we don't have enough leads, or is it truly we don't have enough used cars and we need to start campaigning and bringing those things in? A marketer does not necessarily care about who's doing what on the floor. They just care about the trends, and are we making sure that we're pushing and we're getting the right leads into our CRM. So that's you have to know who you're talking to. And if you go to any different store at any different time across any dealership in the US, often they're not comparing the same data. They're not looking at the same thing, and they care about very different things. So you have to know your audience when you're preparing these reports for them.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So we're reaching the close to the end of our session. George, I want to kick over to you first, then to Michael, and then Catherine. Final thoughts, parting wisdoms as we think about just measurement in general.
Measurement in general. Well, I would say, choose your tool and then dig deep into it and be committed to spending time in it. If you're trying to learn GA4 and you're not spending 2 to 4 hours a week scheduled time in the tool, then it'll be tough to stay familiar with it. Start off with the report snapshot. I think it's one of the best things you can do in GA4. If you're watching this and you say, gosh, I don't know anything about GA4 and I don't really know where to begin, go in the menus and just go to report snapshot and just stare at that page and scroll through the page, and it will ask you a number of questions, and then it will provide you a little information tile. And when you click on that tile for more information, you deep link into the reporting. And so I think over time, that sure helped me. Over time, that can help you kind of understand, like, okay, this report helps answer this question. This report helps answer this question, and here's where I go. And, if you get confused, just go back to that report snapshot and kind of cascade, through the tool and just keep using it.
Michael, final thoughts.
Yeah, be curious. So no one's ever accused me of not being curious, almost to a fault. I say one of the things I try to teach our youngest analyzers is go in with a question at hand, right? So I get it, whether it was GA3 or GA4, there's so much in there, it can be overwhelming. But if you go in with a question that you're looking to get an answer for, you're far more likely to get an actual answer rather than end up in a rabbit hole, which is not to say don't go down the rabbit hole. I've been there many times, but it's often when you first start out, go in with a question that you really are looking for an answer for, and follow your journey through there. And you'll find that, hey, it's not so bad. It's not so hard. And you'll inspire your own self to kind of keep going and eventually end up in the rabbit hole with Alice.
Catherine, bring us home with your final thoughts.
Wow, that's like hard to follow up on both of them, because those are exactly right. Curiosity and spending time with your tool. I think what I would conclude with is really think about how you're going to use your data. What is the intent with all of this reporting? And I think that sometimes, when you go to your GMs and the corporate board and they're like, this is a weapon, you are using this to tell us where we're bad. It's like, you have to present it in such a way that you're very focused on your process and looking at the help. And I think the favorite thing is, let me show you how we can save you money. Let's reallocate funds. And I think that with both GA4 and then when you parallel with what's happening in your CRM, it draws this very clear sight picture of this is what we can do to really improve in so many areas, whether it's process or spending.
Wonderful. Thank you to all three of you, George, Michael, and Catherine. We're going to wrap things up here with a session. Please stick around for the closing remarks. We are going to announce the winner of this Yeti. It's really big. It's heavy. I mean, it's the real deal, and it's also trade pending orange. So how can you go wrong there? We have gone into a lot of really, really good detail, and some of this can sometimes be overwhelming. We've got handouts. We're going to link to those in the documents. They're in our knowledge base, and George helped prepare those for us. And you can obviously reach out to any of the panelists. We've got their contact information as a part of this whole session. They would be, I'm sure, more than happy to assist. Thank you, everybody, for attending today, and we'll see you on the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.